It's been a week since the court's dismissal of President Yoon Suk Yeol over his martial law order. How is South Korea doing without a leader, and have the South Korean people recovered from the political drama? Let's turn to Professor Robert Kelly this morning. Welcome back, Professor Kelly.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Good morning. A week since the court's dismissal, it also means it's been a week without the country's leader. Professor Kelly, how would you evaluate how the country is doing without a president on the social front?
I think actually Korea has responded to this really well. There will always be politicians who make mistakes and do foolish things. I think it's pretty clear and pretty widely accepted now that Yoon Suk Yeol did that, but he was removed in an orderly process. There was no street violence. This is South Korea's second impeachment in 10 years. It went pretty well as far as impeachments go. I mean, obviously it's unfortunate there was an impeachment, but again, there was no street violence. There was no rioting or anything like that. No one was killed. I believe 4 people were killed after Park Geun-hye was removed in the fighting and the street actions after that. And it seems that the public has broadly accepted this. My own read on this is that I think it's pretty clear that Yoon was guilty. I mean, it all happened right there on live TV. You could see on YouTube, if you wanted, helicopters landing outside the National Assembly. So I think it was a lot clearer this time that guilty was the correct verdict. And I think that's why it's gone down pretty well. That's why I think things have gone off fairly smoothly, because I think there's pretty wide acceptance nationally that the verdict was accurate.
You just mentioned there was no dramatic violence or unrest following the impeachment ruling. Last Friday, what do you think the reason is this time?
Yeah, like I said, I think my best guess is that outside of sort of pro-Yoon diehards, I don't know, maybe 25% of the population, the people on the street waving the flags and all that, you're always going to have those people. My sense is beyond that there was pretty wide consensus out there in the country that this impeachment was warranted. And again, I mean, my own sense is throughout the impeachment that I thought that Yoon had a very, very hard road ahead of him, because all of this happened in public. I mean, it was right there on TV. I mean, to this day, you can go on YouTube or Naver and you can see the video, right? I mean, you can, like I said, you can see soldiers punching holes in windows, clambering into the National Assembly. I mean, that stuff, that looks like a coup, right? And perhaps there are other things that justice has heard that which we didn't on the outside. I mean, maybe Yoon had a better argument than we know, but just based on the video footage alone from December, I thought it was actually a pretty open and shut case. I think the video footage is very, very damning to Yoon Suk Yeol, and my sense is that most Koreans accepted that too. Certainly when I talk to my students about this, my classes and whatever, there's certainly been that, right? They all sort of said, we watched this on TV. And so I think that would be my guess as to why this went down publicly, why there was very little action, street action in the week after, because I think, again, the consensus outside of the diehard Yoon supporter, I think the consensus here was that the removal was warranted, and the justices reflected that, right? It was a unanimous 8-0 verdict, which pretty much tells you that Yoon's case wasn't very good.
Plus, it took weeks to find out what the ruling was all about, and some experts say that people took that period to really take it all in and digest the ruling. Now, Professor Kelly, would you say the South Korean people have fully exercised the idea of a democracy? I mean, do you think we learned from our experience 8 years ago?
Yeah, actually, I would argue that South Korea is a really good democratic model now, right? This is 2 impeachments in a row that have gone off pretty smoothly. Or widely, again, sort of the public broadly accepted this. You don't have revolution and rioting and terrorism and stuff like that in the street. I mean, if you compare this to Donald Trump's effort to overturn the election in the United States in January 2021, right, where they stormed the Congress building and everything like that, and you got people waving Trump flags around. I mean, nothing like that happened here, right? I actually think that Korea has really handled this well. I think the longer term, the big democratic issue I think coming out of this is actually lands on sort of the conservative side of the spectrum. I think it's pretty clear that the South Korean Conservative Party needs to nominate better people. I mean, to me, that's the big takeaway here, right? Is that the conservatives have elected or have chosen 2 flawed candidates in a row, right? And the conservatives need to do a better job on candidate recruitment. They need to find better people so this doesn't happen a third time.
Well, Professor Kelly, it's not over. We have another huge national project, a snap presidential election in June. Now, do you think we can have a civil election this time?
Yeah, I do. I would be surprised if this goes haywire, if there was any kind of extrajudicial action or something like that, because again, South Korea has done this before. It was just 8 years ago, so there is, if you will, a sort of model of post-impeachment electioneering, and it went pretty well back then. And Moon Jae-in won that, and there was no dispute. The South Korean conservatives didn't go on the street and riot or something like that. So again, unless the candidates do something really extraordinary in the next 2 months, which I find unlikely, it doesn't strike me that there's any real reason to assume that this is going to fail or go sideways or something like that. It will probably be a fairly straightforward election. I mean, this is something like South Korea's eighth presidential election since democratization. And so my sense is, yeah, again, unless one of the candidates really makes some outrageous claim, and I would encourage Lee Jae-myung, who is the front runner, not to make outrageous claims about Yoon Suk Yeol, right? To sort of treat this as a normal election. If you do, then my guess is that things will go off smoothly.
Better not to take that risk. Professor Kelly,
Right.
what next after the election then? I mean, how do we welcome a new administration in a civil and democratic manner?
Yeah, so I think that again, my guess is that Lee Jae-myung will probably win, right? And he'll sort of govern, I imagine, as a fairly typical South Korean progressive, which means that sort of he'll be more sort of interested in détente with North Korea. My guess is administration will be quite similar to that of Moon Jae-in's. South Korean conservatives won't like it, but I don't really see any reason why there has to be some kind of constitutional breach in response to a victory by Lee Jae-myung. I think the bigger issue going forward then is whether or not South Korea needs constitutional reform. This is sort of out there and floating around now, right? Should South Korea move from one presidency 5-year term to 2 terms for 4 years? I don't know if that would actually sort of resolve the issues. My own sense is that they're more specifically about candidate recruitment to make sure you don't have people who do things that wind up in impeachment. But I think there's a constitutional reform, I think, is now more likely than at any time in the history of the Republic of Korea.
Alrighty, thank you so much for sharing your insight and, of course, connecting with us this morning. We appreciate it, Professor Kelly.
Thank you for having me.